Hi, I'm Arie Kaplan. Stay tuned. Taped with Rabbi Doug is next.
We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug on your TV tonight. But Daddy, I want to watch Monday Night Football.
Forget about Monday Night Football. There's no other thing we're going to watch on Monday but Rabbi Doug.
Yeah, Rabbi Doug on TV tonight. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. Oh, everybody talk about Doug.
Shalom and welcome to Taped with Rabbi Doug. Glad you could be with us today. My guest today is someone I've known for a very long time, and I'm so glad to have her on the show today, Arie Kaplan. Karen, welcome to the show. I am so glad to have you with us. Let me talk a little bit about our friendship and relationship. As Karen, first of all, her brothers are close to my age, went to school with me, and she's a little bit younger. And then later years, she became connected to someone I grew up with. And along the way, we were teaching together. She was teaching in religious school and Hebrew school, as I was, and we did a lot of programs together. I still remember one very special when we had students from all over the North Shore making Gregors at Purim time that we did together. It's still very fond to me, and I still have that Gregor that I made along the way. And Karen is a seasoned religious school and Hebrew school teacher. She is a graduate of the Chicago Jewish Day School system and very knowledgeable. And at the same time, she is the author of this book right here, The Descendants of Rajgrod and Learning to Forgive. And Karen's book focuses on her life growing up with her father's life growing up, and then her father's later years with her and her family. And of course, there's been a lot of tragedy, not only the Holocaust. Her father's a Holocaust survivor, which so much molded his life on who he was and his surviving. And along the way, she lost a brother, which molded her father's life once again, and the loss of a son. And then she had her own personal tragedy with her family, which molded her life and changed again. And I want to talk about that. But let me tell you a little bit about Karen. She was born and raised in Chicago in West Rogers Park on the north side of Chicago. She speaks all over the place. She has a bachelor's from the University of Illinois in nutrition and medical dietetics and trained at the Claret Center in Hyde Park. She trained as a spiritual director. She has a private practice and that she's maintained, and she's been a lecturer for many years. She had a bittersweet relationship with her father over the years, and after he died, she turned her life into memoirs of her feelings. She's had articles written about her and about her book and about her life all over the place and on television before. And her father was a Holocaust survivor. Her mother passed away years ago. And Karen, I want to welcome you to the show. And I want to tell you that talking about your father, Arie Kaplan, who I've known for many, many years, as he was in my synagogue where I was rabbi for over 20 years with me, I knew him in a different way, obviously, than I found out about him by reading through your book. Because your father, to me, was the former Torah reader at Ner Tamid congregation for many years, and then Ezras Israel, where he was a member himself and davened. He was a person who knew how to daven and was involved in synagogue life on a regular basis. He was a quiet man, yet an outspoken man with his friends. He had a lot of very close friends that he would sit with at Kiddush every week and davening every week. He was a regular attendee of the synagogue, not just someone who popped in now and then. And of course, I knew him very, very well in that way. But you had a bittersweet relationship. Your father, the way he raised his children, the relationship he had with your mother, were all affected by his anger and his hurt and his relationship with surviving the Holocaust. Can you tell us a little bit about that and give us a Vorspeise, as we say, for our non-Jewish viewers, a taste or a little preview of your father's life in that way that you talk about in the book?
So my father was born in Rajgrod, Poland, which is northeastern Poland, and his Holocaust began with a home invasion, and he witnessed his mother and his sisters being pulled out of his home by a group of Polish men and watched them being murdered from a hiding place. And he ran into the forests of Rajgrod, further into the forests of Eastern Europe, and he lived there on and off for about 3.5 years until the war ended. Life was extremely difficult living in the forest, you can imagine, living in and out of barns. At one point, he had met a family from Hamburg that had helped fed him, clothed him, and then sent him off again.
I want to stop for a second just to point out, your father's emotional health was affected, yet he never lost his faith in God. He was always very religious and very devout, and I was with him to the very end. I was davening with him at the place where he lived at the very, very end, and saw him on a regular basis. And he never gave that up. Even in a wheelchair, even very sick, he came down to services in the synagogue there on a regular basis. It was so important to him. Most people, or I would say many people who have the emotional distress that he went through, give up their faith in God. Yet he became staunch with it, even though it affected his behavioral issues on an emotional basis. His torment that he went through.
He connected to his Judaism, to davening, praying, to reading Torah in the synagogues. I grew up with the motto of my home, "We will not let Hitler win." And I believe, though, that he was so connected to following the mitzvot of davening and
Observing
reading
Shabbat and keeping kosher and reading Torah.
And that kept him alive. In addition to that, for us, it was, we will not let Hitler win. And so we would do whatever it took to continue the next generation of Jews.
And it was very important to him that all his children went to Jewish day schools, that they had a good Jewish education, that they observed, that they were, religious in their own way. How it was, your brother Howard of blessed memory became a rabbi.
Yes.
And that was very important, and your father took great pride in that and talked about it. How do you think that these things affected his raising his children?
So when my father sailed across America and came here, he had nothing with him except for his soiled, lice-infested clothing. But what he did have with him, he carried a lot of anger, hatred, and resentment against the entire world. And because he couldn't process these emotions, he spewed all this anger and bitterness on the ones closest to him. So I grew up in an abusive home.
And in your quest of kibud av v'em, honor your father and your mother, it must have been very hard to keep this quiet all these years and have your own anger and distress because of it internalized. Is that right?
It was very hard. I didn't quite know how difficult life was compared to my other friends, but I knew, being a child of a Holocaust survivor, there was something very odd and strange and different about my childhood than other friends who did not have any parents that have gone through the Holocaust.
So obviously, I've known your family since I was about 13 years old or so, and I obviously never realized any of these things. Did you ever want to seek help outside of the home for yourself, for your brothers, for your mother, in feeling this? Or did you say, my father went through the Holocaust, this is just who he is, and I have to accept this? How did you process that as a teenager?
Well, as a teenager, I learned never to complain because my father lived through unimaginable hell. He spent his winters sleeping on a bed of snow. So when I once complained to my father that it was really cold out during the wintertime, he told me not to complain. So I learned at a very young age never to complain. And I grew up I'm handed this life, this lifestyle, this home, and I just went about doing what I needed to do. It wasn't until a few years before my father passed away that I was actually working with a therapist who saw that I too carried a lot of anger and bitterness in my heart, which I never noticed. And she had said to me, Karen, it's really important for you to forgive your father before he passes.
The theme of your book in going through all these stories is learning to forgive. What is your favorite story in the book that has a little bit of a positive edge?
Well, my father was, for me, which benefited me, was when my father was in the ICU at Highland Park Hospital, and he laid there for about 7 days comatose. And his eyes were closed, he hadn't moved, and I came there every morning, sat at the edge of his bed, and just made sure that the doctors and nurses were doing their job. I finally asked the nurse on the 7th day, and I said, do you think my father could hear me if I would speak to him? And the nurse said, no, he's been like this for 7 days. So she left the room, and something came over me on that day, and it was a sense of compassion that I've never felt for my father. And my heart filled with this love and compassion for him. And I walked up to him and I held his hand, and I brushed the hair off of his forehead, and he had 2 vertical grooves. So I sensed that he was in pain. And I held his hand and I said, Daddy, it's time to let go. You've suffered so much in your life, all your life. You don't need to suffer in death. Let go, Daddy. Your father, Chaim Shlomo, your mother, Bela, your sisters, your baby brother, they're waiting for you. Let go, Daddy. And then I said, Daddy, I forgive you. I want you to know that I truly forgive you. And I started to cry. And within seconds, I looked up at him and his eyes popped wide open.
Ooh, chills.
And chills, and I was startled, so I moved a little bit to the right and his eyes tracked me. I moved to the left, his eyes followed me once again, and I thought, is my father cheating death one more time? So I ran out of the room, beckoned for the nurse. We came back, but his eyes were closed once again. My father passed away the following day, but I knew that I had finally forgiven my father.
And you know he heard you.
He may have heard me, yes, but I buried him with a loving and compassionate heart. And yeah.
So wonderful, so wonderful. That's great. And that's all depicted in your book as well. Karen, you know, I hate to even bring it up because it still scares me. You went through a personal tragedy, and the week that it happened, I was in shock for you. And still, it brings fear to me thinking about it. Your father's Holocaust experience and running into hiding and seeing his family murdered started with a home invasion in Poland during World War II, during the Holocaust. You had your own home invasion and fear in your own home for you and your children. And I know that you talk about it. I don't know how you do, by the way, but maybe it's something that our audience can learn from, because it happened to you, and when it happened to you, my heart was pounding for weeks. That's how fearful. I don't know how you ever walked back into your own home, but you want to tell us about it, because I can't.
Okay, so when I finished writing my memoir, I thought, as difficult as it was to forgive my father, he can't hurt me anymore. And when I went back to Poland and forgiven those that murdered my grandma, my aunts, my cousins, and destroyed my father's life, I forgave those. But that was 70 years ago, and no Nazi is going to come knocking on my door trying to kill me.
Hopefully.
But I thought, what if someone would dare hurt my children? To me, that would be the ultimate challenge of forgiveness. And 2 months later, on March 19th, 2013, it was 11 p.m. at night. My garage door was left open. 3 men masked with guns entered my home. My son Noah was at the kitchen table. He was thrown face down on the floor, hands tied up, feet tied up, and they asked how many were upstairs. He said 2. They gagged him, threw his cell phone in the microwave. He was held at gunpoint by one of the thugs. 2 men then ran up the stairs, and I woke up with 2 guns at my head. One of the thugs was wearing medical scrubs and a surgeon's mask. He pulled it down. I jumped out of bed, and he wanted to know where there's money. I told him there's no money. Take me to the bank. I didn't want them to hurt my children. Just get me out of this home. He said no. He tied up my hands, not my feet, and he threw me on the floor. Now, I was held at gunpoint. The third man, he ran down the hallway. He burst my daughter's door open. And what I didn't know and what I do not share in the book is that my daughter had a dream very similar to what had happened. And in her dream, she had just turned the light off to go to bed. She heard a door open and close, and she thought maybe it was her oldest brother who doesn't live there. And she grabbed the phone in her dream, about to dial 911, but she waited. And then she heard someone come up the stairs like she did in reality. And then she heard me screaming. And in her dream, when she heard someone come up the stairs, she waited, and it was her oldest brother. But now she heard me screaming, so she grabbed the phone, she dialed 911, locked her door, and hid behind the dresser. Within seconds, the third thug burst the door down and came into her room. And he held a gun to her head and said, "Give me the phone." Well, she had already dialed 911. And so he ran out of her room, grabbed the guy holding me, and they both ran downstairs, and all 3 men bolted out of my home. Within a minute, the Deerfield police had surrounded my home, but it was too late. They were never caught.
Did they ever take anything?
No. Nope.
So your daughter saved you
Yes.
with her wisdom.
With her wisdom, her intuition, yes, she saved us.
That is an amazing story. So the story starts with the home invasion, it ends with home invasion. Thank God you don't still live there, and it's very scary. But
so with that, I thought, so now it was the first time that I actually felt what my father felt running through the forest. I was paranoid. I was scared. I couldn't live there or stay in my home without having my boyfriend's dog there at the time. And so I wore a panic button around my neck. I spent 24/7 on the computer looking up home invasions and home invaders.
Sure.
I finally felt what my father felt. Even though my story was so minute compared to his, I knew what it was like to face the possibility of what they would have done to my children and me.
Absolutely, absolutely. And today the Deerfield police are still looking for those people.
They still are.
It's unbelievable.
Right.
It's
But I knew that justice was not going to bring me peace, and that the only way that I can go back to that place of peace when I forgave my father and I felt so good inside was that I needed to forgive those men. I didn't want to remain a victim of my circumstances. I needed to move beyond that. I wanted to heal. I wanted to be happy and peaceful again. So I forgave those men.
I haven't forgiven them.
Oh.
You can, but I can't. And I'll tell you honestly that for me, when I hear creaking at night, I think of Karen Kaplan because I always, it's a lifetime scary thing, obviously. But what brought me comfort was when I heard you moved. And that brought me comfort because I felt like you were safe. that made a difference and your children were safe. What do you think when people read this book, what do you think what is the lesson they learn outside of forgiveness? Because that's your theme. The Karen Kaplan story within the book, not your father's story, is the theme of being able to forgive even in the light, even through a life of suffering and tragedy. What do you think other people learn? Do you think your father ever forgave Do you think he ever forgave those people that caused him the hate and the tragedy that happened to his family when they were all murdered?
No, he never forgave, and I don't judge him. I can't blame him for not forgiving.
Certainly not.
Absolutely not. But because he just continued to carry that hatred with him, and didn't know how to process his emotions, we carried on with the effects of the Holocaust. So I write about this lineage of suffering, not just from the Holocaust, but my father could actually trace his lineage back to the time when we were Jews in Spain. We came from an ancestry of rabbis. And from pogrom to pogrom, from generation to generation, we Jews had carried all this suffrage, and I wanted it to end with me.
Wow, wow, wow. So you reconnected with your sister-in-law, who I believe is on the southeast coast,
Yes.
and your brother, your other brother, is on the west coast.
Yes.
And you now are living in the northern suburbs and going around and speaking. How do you think life has changed for you?
Well, first of all, I never thought I would write a book, let alone a memoir. So that's very new to me. And so because of this book, I've been able to speak at many synagogues and churches and different organizations and share my story in hopes that anyone who have had a difficult past, whether their parents were abusive, siblings, or they've gone through a traumatic experience, that they don't have to live in the past and they could rise above and they could learn to forgive and find happiness again, and that they can heal, and that no one needs to remain a victim of their past.
So you're in the public eye now,
Yeah.
and you've taught hundreds of children over the years. Are your former students who are now young adults and teenagers, are they reconnecting with you over your being in the public eye again?
Well, it's interesting. Some of the articles that were written, I've had some people come email me and say, "Oh, I remember your father." I had a picture of my father as a young man, and they said, "I remember your father on Devon Avenue, and I remember your father in this area of life." And other people have reconnected with me as well. Yeah, so it's very interesting.
Very, very, very nice. So do you think that that your father's life, do you think that this book, and I think it is much different from other Holocaust survivor books that are out? Because certainly, like your father, was he interviewed by Steven Spielberg in the Shoah Foundation?
My father didn't want to be interviewed. He said it would be a waste of his time and just didn't want to take his time to do that. But I start the book where my son wanted to interview my father for a high school project. And finally, my father actually said okay to my son. And I thought that was so strange because I really never sat down and talked to my father about his past, and yet here's my 16-year-old son who was going to interview him. And we set up the recorder, and so interesting to hear him. It was very difficult for my father. He had started to cry.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So you went to Poland, and not only did you talk about your book in Poland, but you visited where your father lived. You visited. You told me off camera that you met the mayor of his town, and how did that make you feel? What did you feel? Your father's whole side of the family was murdered in that town. How did it make you feel being there?
Well, the first time I went, I actually went back there. I saw my father's home. I met an old woman, Christina, who remembered my grandmother. Wow. I actually saw the home where I knew the descendant of the man who murdered my family was living.
Wow.
I went to the cemetery of Rajgrod, where I uncovered some stones with Hebrew. So I walked through the town. But after my first visit, I had contacted my cousin Avi in Israel and said, let's build a monument in Rajgrod. Let's remember the Jews that perished there. And we built a beautiful monument which was erected this past September 2014. And it
At the cemetery.
At the cemetery. It had a Jewish star in the midst and a slat in the middle of it to show that there once was Jewish life in Rajgrod, but it ended. I went back just a month ago to meet with the mayor of Rajgrod to share my book, my story, and right before I left, I found out that the monument was desecrated, and it seemed that somebody came in over in the middle of the night with a jackhammer and just desecrated the Jewish star. And so it was very...
Anti-Semitism still exists in Rajgrod, certainly, as it does in a lot of Europe, unfortunately.
Yes. So I met with the mayor. We discussed how we can repair the monument. They were very open and willing.
The city is willing to take on doing
that.
Yes.
And so we're working on that.
It
will take time.
Is there any Jewish life anywhere in the vicinity of Rajgrod anymore?
The interesting thing about Rajgrod is the town historian, a blind man, he actually had corresponded with my father over 20 years ago. When I met with the mayor and many of the city council members, he remembered, which was very interesting. But his wife, I was told that his wife's mother on her deathbed said to her daughter, I want you to know that I am a Jew.
Wow.
So the town historian's wife
was a Jewish survivor.
Right.
Wow.
And he was very open in writing about Jewish life in Rajgrod, even before he knew this. And my father had connected, and many Jews had connected with him. So they're fairly open about
talking about it.
Yes.
What a story. And well, I can't thank you enough for being on the show. This is amazing, and I know that everyone is going to want to read The Descendants of Rajgrod Learning to Forgive by Karen L. Kaplan. It's her memoir of life with her father's life, and the end of her father's life and what's happened since. And there's certainly a postscript to share after that, and maybe that'll come out on the second book someday. But I want to thank you so much for being on the show, Karen Kaplan. Remember, if you want to find out more about Descendants of Rajgrod and Karen's book, or you want to ask Karen any questions, you can email us at info@tvrabbi.com. I will forward that email to Karen, and I know she'll get back to you. If you want to check out this show on the internet or shows in the past, or see our website, it's www.tvrabbi.com. I want to thank you, Karen Kaplan, for being on the show. I want to thank all of you for being with us. Hope to see you next time right here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. Shalom, everyone.
And I'm talking about Rabbi Doug. Talking about Rabbi Doug. Talking about Rabbi Doug on your TV show. Well, he's the rabbi for me. Anytime you need. You're gonna get married or you're gonna die. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug on the TV tonight.
This has been a Taped with Rabbi Doug production.